Leave this place immediately before the police arrive. This place is not for people like you." The voice sliced through the elegant air like a sharp blade. The lobby of the Aurora Crest Hotel, a 5-star landmark beside Lake Michigan, froze in place. The chandeliers still shimmered above, but no one saw the light anymore. Every gaze turned toward the man standing in the center, his voice booming like a verdict. Bradley Stone, the general manager of the hotel, tall, broad-shouldered, his gray suit tailored perfectly, his face reddening not just from anger, but from the intoxication of authority. In front of him stood Renee Parker, a woman in a plain white blouse, fitted jeans and a black baseball cap shading half her face. She didn't react. She didn't argue. She simply stood still, her eyes calm and unwavering, as still as the lake before a storm. A rough hand clamped around her arm, the hand of Jason Miller, a young security guard just starting his shift. He didn't realize how much unnecessary force he was using. "Ma'am, please step outside," he said, his tone no longer a request, but an order. Renee didn't pull away. She simply breathed steadily. In that moment, the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Guests waiting to check in stopped mid-motion. A few slowly lifted their phones, camera lights flickering on. A housekeeper near the elevator whispered, "Oh my God, did he just say that Bradley saw the flashing red dots of cameras?" But he didn't care. The more witnesses, the louder he became. "People like you are always the same," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt and false righteousness. "Fake IDs, fake names, cheap tricks. You really think you can fool Horizon? No Aurora Crest." Not today. A smug half-smile curved on his lips, the expression of a man convinced he was doing the right thing. Renee still didn't move. She merely turned her wrist slightly, eyes on the hand gripping her. "Let go," she said softly. Her voice wasn't loud or trembling, but it carried a natural authority, the kind that comes from someone who has made billion-dollar decisions. Jason hesitated. Something in that calm, steady tone made him pause, but Bradley's glare froze him again. "Don't listen to her," Bradley snapped. "She's nobody here." A murmur rippled through the lobby. A middle-aged couple exchanged glances. The husband whispered, "I can't believe he just said that." His wife gripped his hand tightly, eyes blazing. In front of everyone like this, from across the room, Olivia Chen, a well-known travel vlogger, live-streaming her Chicago's Hidden Gems series, tilted her camera toward the scene. "Guys, I think something's happening at the Aurora Crest," she whispered into her mic, eyes never leaving the confrontation. The comments on her screen exploded. "Wait, what's happening? Is he serious? Keep recording." Phone lights flickered like fireflies. Every new record was another cut into the hotel's reputation, and no one on Bradley's team noticed. Bradley stepped forward, jabbing a finger so close it nearly brushed Renee's cheek. "Who do you think you are?" Here we know exactly what kind of guests belong. And trust me, you're not one of them. His voice echoed across the marble lobby, bouncing off the glass walls that reflected her figure, a lone woman standing small against luxury, yet commanding a gravity that seemed to tilt the entire room toward her. Behind the front desk, a few employees hid watching. Sophia Ramirez, a young receptionist of 26, felt her hands tremble. She had seen the name Renee Parker Penthouse Suite VIP tag glowing clearly on the screen before Bradley slammed the computer shut. Her heart pounded. He's wrong, she thought, but bit her lip in silence. Here silence was job security. A little girl about 8 years old tugged on her mother's hand. "Mum, why is that man yelling at her?" The mother pulled her close eyes, shining with tears. Because some people still think they have the right to decide who belongs where, sweetheart. Bradley waved his hand sharply. Call the police. Tell them we have an intruder in the lobby. Kim Hart, the blonde receptionist with a perfect professional smile, immediately picked up the phone. Aurora Crest Hotel. We have an unidentified guest. Renee's gaze swept across the lobby, pausing on faces turned downward. People who could only look at the scene through screens instead of confronting the truth. She said nothing. She simply inhaled a deep, steady breath and exhaled softly. The ceiling light reflected in her eyes, gleaming like steel. Then she spoke, her voice low-measured and clear. Be careful, Mr. Stone. Every word you say is already history. The sentence dropped like a whisper, but the air grew colder by a few degrees. Jason instinctively released her arm. A few guests gasped. Olivia's voice trembled through the live stream. Did you guys hear that she said, every word you say is already history? Wow. Bradley gave a short, nervous laugh, trying to sound dismissive, but faltering. History. Who do you think you are? Renee didn't answer. She just looked at him. Her gaze held no anger, only patience, a quiet patience that suggested she already knew what was about to happen, even if no one else in the room did. The glow from hundreds of phone cameras shone on her face, making it clear that in a world where the loudest voices often belong to those in power, there are still people who don't need to shout to be heard. She hadn't come to start a fight. She had come to end one. And in the next 9 minutes, that gleaming lobby, once the place that decided who belonged, would no longer belong to Bradley Stone. It would belong to the woman he had just called nobody. 9 minutes before the storm erupted, the lobby of the Aurora Crest Hotel still floated, in its usual elegance. The sound of suitcase wheels rolled softly over marble floors. The gentle scent of orchids drifted from the crystal vase at the front desk, and the faint notes of a piano rippled from a distant corner, the kind of luxurious music people paid thousands of dollars to hear over breakfast. No one could have guessed that in just a few minutes, this very place would become the scene of one of the most expensive moments on social media. Renee Parker stepped through the revolving glass doors, followed by a rush of cold air from Lake Michigan. She carried no entourage, no designer luggage, no diamond-studded watch, only a small leather crossbody bag, a pair of worn flats, and a black cap pulled low over her face. But what no one could see was the quiet aura of someone who had stood in billion-dollar boardrooms and never once lost her calm. She didn't need attention. In fact, she wanted to blend in. Because today, she wasn't here as the founder of the Parker Hospitality Group, but as an anonymous guest who wanted to see how her employees treated people they thought didn't matter. At the front desk, Sophia Ramirez, a young receptionist barely a year into her job, greeted the previous guest with a bright smile. But when Renee approached, she froze for half a second, an unconscious reaction. Her eyes flicked over Renee's outfit, her bag, her cap, all in a blink, before she forced a polite, slightly strained smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How may I help you?" Sophia's tone was professional, but not natural. Renee replied softly, "I have a reservation. The name is Parker Penthouse Suite." She placed a black card on the counter, along with her ID. Her movements precise, practiced the gestures of someone who'd done this thousands of times. Sophia typed a few keys, her eyes widening as the screen flashed the words, "VIP Owner Access." She leaned in, slightly ready to ask something, but a deep, cold male voice, one all too familiar in the hospitality industry, cut through the air. "I'll handle this, Sophia." Bradley Stone appeared like a wolf, catching the scent of suspicion in his territory. Grey suit, navy tie, sharp eyes. He was the image of power in hotel management. But when those eyes landed on Renee, what flickered there wasn't professionalism. It was prejudice. He picked up her card between two fingers as if touching it might stain him. "Penthouse!" "Huh," he said, raising an eyebrow, his voice dripping with doubt. "Booked under the name Parker Renee." Nodded. "That's right. This card." He tilted it slightly under the light. "You do know this is reserved for Diamond Tier members only, right?" "I do," Renee answered with a faint smile, as if humoring a child's question. Bradley frowned. "What brings you to Chicago? Miss Parker travel," she said simply. "Business travel, which company?" Renee looked at him calmly. "I don't think you need that information to hand me my key." Her tone was gentle, but the edge beneath it cut clean. His expression darkened. Behind him, two other staff members, Kim Hart and Kevin Doyle, exchanged glances and smirked the smug kind of laugh shared by people who believe they already know someone's worth. On the computer screen, Sophia could still see the line. "Confirmed VIP status active," but before she could speak, Bradley's glare froze her. "I said I'll handle it." He snapped, then turned back to Renee with a crooked smile. "You see, Aurora Crest has very high standards. We've dealt with certain people pretending to book luxury suites, trying to scam the system." "Is that so?" Renee tilted her head, her voice, now steady, with a quiet strength that hinted at steel. "And you think I'm one of them?" Bradley shrugged. "I don't think I verify." He turned toward Kevin. "Take this card and verify it. Make sure there's no fraud. The penthouse isn't for just anyone." Kevin nodded, his tone deliberately loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Happens all the time, fancy-looking cards that don't check out." A guest nearby frowned. "He's saying that without even checking." His companion shook their head. "He just thinks she doesn't look rich enough to stay here." The air in the lobby shifted tense as a drawn string. Renee didn't move, didn't speak. She simply stood there, hands folded, her eyes, wandering over the lobby she had once chosen every marble tile for. She remembered the day she signed the contracts to build the Aurora Crest, the view of Lake Michigan, the light pouring through the glass ceiling. Those were the reasons she'd invested hundreds of millions of dollars. She believed this place would symbolize respect and inclusion for everyone. And now, in the very building she'd built to embody those ideals, she was being treated as someone who didn't belong. Kim leaned closer to Bradley, her voice low but loud enough to be overheard. "Should I call security, just to avoid trouble later?" Bradley nodded. "Do it." A soft ding came from the desk, the internal alert for security. Sophia swallowed hard. She could still see reservation confirmed glowing on her screen. Sweat dampened her palms. "Mr. Stone, I see quiet." Bradley snapped his tone sharp enough to cut. The words died in her throat. Renee looked at Sophia, not with blame, but with understanding. Her eyes were warm, calm, silently saying, "You don't have to risk your job. I'll handle this." The doors opened. Jason Miller, the young security guard, stepped in posture, stiff hand resting on his radio. Kim pointed. "That's her unidentified guest trying to access the executive floor." Renee turned toward him, her gaze steady. "What exactly do you plan to do?" Jason hesitated. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask you to leave the lobby until we verify your credentials. Are you aware I've already checked in?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. Orders from the general manager." The air cracked. A young man near the entrance muttered, "No way they're calling security because of how she looks." Phones rose higher. A wave of outrage began to surge through live comments online. Renee drew a slow breath. Her heartbeat was steady. No rush. No tremor. This wasn't the first time she'd been treated like an intruder. She had once slept in her car in Atlanta after a hotel turned her away because of an internal policy. She had heard countless empty apologies once people realized she was their CEO. But today was different. She wasn't here to teach. She was here to observe. And Aurora Crest, the child she'd built from blood and faith, had just given her its most painful answer. Bradley crossed his arms, triumphant. "So you have no proof, no booking, no authority. Anyone can claim they're a penthouse guest." Renee lifted her head, meeting his eyes. Her voice was calm, but each word struck like stone. Sometimes people don't need to shout to be heard. They just wait. Bradley scoffed. Wait for what Renee smiled, a still mirror-like smile, for the truth to arrive. And when it does, you won't be the one in control of this lobby anymore. The lights reflected in her eyes, cold and bright. A strange silence settled over the space. In one of Chicago's most luxurious hotels, no one knew that in just 9 minutes the balance of power would completely shift, because the woman they said didn't belong here was the one who had built it. A ripple of murmurs swept across the lobby as security guard Jason Miller stepped forward, his hand already resting on his radio. The glow from dozens of phones lit up Renee Parker's face, turning her into the focal point inside a circle of prejudice and power. From behind the counter, Bradley Stone adjusted his tie, his voice low and imperious. "You are obstructing hotel operations. I am ordering you to leave immediately. If you refuse, I will let the police handle it." His words cracked across the space like a gavel striking marble. Instead of fear, Renee simply lifted her chin and met his stare, a silent look that made a few people in the crowd inch backward. She answered in a clear, low voice, "I have a reservation, and my name is still in your system." "Do not lie," Bradley said, folding his arms. "Do you think I do not know these tricks? We see dozens of people using fake cards and fake names, trying to slip into luxury rooms. That does not happen at Aurora Crest." Jason hovered nearby, uneasy. He had witnessed plenty of incidents, but the woman's eyes made him feel something else. Not fear, but wrongness. "Mr. Stone," he said quietly, "maybe we should." "There is no maybe." Bradley snapped, voice sharp as a blade. "Do your job." Renee stayed silent. She felt Jason's hand tighten on her arm, not hard, but enough to pull back 1,000 old memories, suspicious looks, cold phrases, the many times she had been treated as an outsider because she did not look like wealth. A chill moved down her spine, not from fear, but from recognition. She drew a breath and said softly, "Let go of me." Jason hesitated. This time her voice stopped him. It was not a request. It was an order delivered so gently it felt impossible to defy. Seeing the hesitation, Bradley barked, "Jason, do your job. Do not let her control you." The whole lobby turned. Guests with phones paused, recording to listen. A middle-aged woman whispered, "My God, how can he talk like that?" A young man by the door shook his head and murmured to a friend, "Keep filming, this is going viral for sure." In the corner, Sofia Ramirez stood behind the front desk, eyes locked on the screen. The name, Renee Parker, Penthouse. Suite VIP confirmed, still glowed on the system. She had tried once to speak, but Bradley had barked her down. Now her heart beat, hammered. Sweat traced her wrist, her hand trembling on the keyboard. "He is doing something wrong," she thought, "and I am watching it happen without the courage to speak." She glanced at Renee. The woman did not shout or argue. She just stood there. That very stillness made Sophia feel ashamed on behalf of the system she served. Bradley checked his watch and tapped the counter. "I do not have time for this pretending." "Lauren," he called toward the back. "Call the police. Report a guest using fake documents and disrupting the lobby." The voice of Kim Hart, listed as Lauren in internal records, came back, steady, formal, cold. "Yes, sir. I am reporting now." The words fell like a final cut, splitting the air. A few guests cried out, "What, she did nothing, and has he lost his mind?" Live streamer Olivia Chen was almost breathless. Tilting her phone, she told thousands of viewers whose comments were exploding. They just called the police. No reason. No proof. This is Chicago, year 2025. And this is still happening. Renee stood her ground. Her eyes moved from the desk to Bradley, to Kim, to Jason, and then stopped on Sophia, who was shaking with a conflicted gaze. For a heartbeat, Sophia felt as if Renee could see straight through her fear. But instead of blame, Renee's look softened, as if to say, "It is all right, I understand." Bradley turned to Kevin Doyle, who had just stepped out of the small office, holding Renee's black card. He raised it high like a trophy. "This card is not valid," he declared. "The system failed to confirm it. It could be a corporate card being used improperly." The crowd gasped. A woman whispered, "They just took her card." Renee said nothing, but her eyes darkened for an instant. Not anger, but a mark being set. Sophia bit her lip. She knew Kevin was lying. The system still showed valid active. She drew a breath and said quietly, "Mr. Stone, the data shows otherwise." "Silence," Bradley snapped. "Do you want to lose your job?" The lobby went dead quiet. Only heartbeats and the faint buzz of Olivia's phone remained. Renee inhaled deeply. The air in her lungs felt thick as if it contained 1,000 stored memories. She had been humiliated before, turned away before, dismissed before. But nowhere had it cut like this to be demeaned in the very place she created, to strip prejudice away. She looked up to the glass ceiling, light scattered across her face like fragments of her own past. She smiled slightly, and the scene seemed to tilt, because no one could understand how she remained so calm. Bradley sneered, "What are you smiling at? Do you think I am joking?" Renee shook her head slowly. "No. I think you just wrote your name into the history of this place." "What on earth are you talking about?" Bradley growled. Renee did not answer at once. She reached into her pocket and took out her phone. The soft blue light washed over her face, cool and gentle. One tap, a small beep. She lifted the phone to her ear. "Tara," she said quietly, her voice unwavering. On the other end, a woman's voice came through, crisp, exact, professional. "Standing by for your instruction, Miss Parker." The lobby was crowded, yet each word carried clearly through the air. Bradley frowned. "Who is Tara?" Renee looked straight at him, a calm gaze almost chilling. "Activate the internal protocol. Timestamp everything. Log all video, audio, and security data." Jason stared. "Internal protocol," he repeated, stunned. Bradley let out a harsh laugh. "She is out of her mind." "You think you are in a movie." But Tara did not laugh. Her voice came louder and clearer through the phone's speaker. Confirmed. "Internal safety protocol activated. All data in the Aurora Crest lobby is now being captured and archived." Several guests gaped. Jason stepped back a half pace. Sophia's eyes went wide. She recognized the phrase. Internal protocol accessible only to the board or the highest owner. Bradley was still laughing, but the sound fell apart in the heavy air. "Fine," he said. "You want to play power games? Power here belongs to me." Renee lowered the phone and looked at him. "You are wrong, Bradley. Here power belongs to the truth, and it is about to speak." No one said another word. Sophia glanced at the system clock. It read 6:47 in the evening. She knew this was only the beginning. The last rays of late afternoon light poured through the glass and settled on Renee's face with a soft, warm glow. In that light, she was no longer the woman under suspicion. She was something larger, a storm rising from silence. 9 minutes had passed since she entered the lobby. 9 minutes enough time for a hotel to change hands. And in only a few more seconds, everyone would learn who they had just insulted. The air inside the Aurora Crest lobby thickened as if the entire room were holding its breath. The light from dozens of phones bounced off the glass ceiling, blending with the fading dusk outside and casting a cool golden sheen over every face. Bradley Stone stood frozen for a few seconds. After hearing Tara's voice ring out from Renee Parker's phone, he did not understand it, but the instincts of a man who had wielded power for too long told him something was wrong. "You think you can scare me with a few empty commands?" He barked out a dry, twisted laugh. "Here I am, the general manager. I control everything." Renee tilted her head, her eyes sharp as the metallic glint reflected from the stone pillars. "No, Mr. Stone," she said softly. "I allow you to operate everything, but you have never controlled it." The sound of that line rattled not only Bradley but the entire crowd. A few guests began to whisper. What did she just say? And it sounds like she is the one with authority here. Jason Miller stepped back, another half-pace. He no longer knew what to do. His hand hung suspended in the air, afraid to touch, afraid to pull away from Renee's phone. Tara's voice came again, clear and professional, as if broadcast directly from a command room. System audit has been activated. Verification, level owner, tier. Access code required, Parker. Every eye in the lobby snapped toward Bradley. He stood stock still, sweat beginning to bead on his brow. "What did you say? Owner, do not joke with me." Renee did not answer. She simply walked toward the counter, her heels ticking lightly against the stone. Each step cold and steady, like the heartbeat of a storm, gathering in the distance. Guests parted on instinct. They knew they were witnessing something about to be written into history. When only a short distance separated her from Bradley, she stopped. The lobby went silent. Only the ticking of the wall clock remained. "You just called the police because you believed I was an intruder," Renee said, her voice low. "But carrying you confiscated my personal property, humiliated me in front of dozens of witnesses, and called it procedure. Very well. Then let the real procedure speak." She lifted her phone and switched on the speaker. Tara's voice grew resonant, precise on every syllable. Access code confirmed, proceeding with ownership verification for Aurora Crest, Chicago Lakefront. A display at the front desk, normally used for room listings, flickered to life. The Parker Hospitality Group logo appeared, followed by the words, "Ownership verification. In progress." The murmurs broke open. She can actually access their system, and impossible. This is an internal network, and, my God, what is happening? Bradley turned pale. "Stop this now. Who gave you access?" Renee did not need to answer. The system itself spoke with a cool, female synthetic voice. "Ownership verified. Parker, Renee. Founder, Chief Executive Officer, primary shareholder." The lobby erupted. Gasps, shouts, camera shutters, firing in bursts. Olivia Chen nearly cried out on her live stream. "You are watching this live. The woman they humiliated is the owner of this hotel." Every phone in the lobby lifted higher, a forest of white lights. Bradley stumbled back, His face drained. No, impossible. This is a scam. Someone is hacking the system, but... Tara countered immediately through the speaker, steady and unshaken. Data verified by the internal network. Spoofing is impossible. All access logs are being recorded and transmitted to headquarters. Sofia Ramirez let out a small sob. She turned to her colleague, Kim Hart, and whispered, trembling, She really is the chief executive officer. Kim did not answer. Her eyes were locked on her own staff badge as her heart pounded. Renee stepped up, onto the service ledge phone, still in hand. "Now then, Mr. Stone," she said, "would you like to continue the procedure because I can take it from here?" Bradley opened his mouth, but no sound came. His eyes flitted across the crowd, as if searching for an ally. No one spoke up. Even Jason the guard had lowered his hand and backed away, his voice rough. "I am sorry, miss." Parker Renee nodded. "It is all right. You were following orders that line jolted Bradley." He realized she had not come to exact revenge. She had come to expose. Tara's voice returned, verification complete, awaiting next directive. Renee swept her gaze around the room, every eye fixed on her. She spoke slowly, each word ringing like a verdict. "Tara, initiate emergency level disciplinary protocol code. Zero access, suspend the administrative privileges of Bradley Stone and the current shift team." Bradley lurched forward. "Wait, you cannot!" But the badge on his chest chirped. The tiny light flipped from green to red. The front desk terminals began to chime in unison. Access denied the monitors behind the counter went black, leaving only the line system locked by owner authorization. Kim Hart gave a small cry as her badge flashed red and died. Kevin Doyle staggered back, shaking, and his hand let Renee's black card slip onto the counter. The thud was dry and small, but it landed like a period at the end of a chapter. Bradley flailed. "You are destroying your own reputation." Renee answered, her voice cold as steel. "No, Mr. Stone. I am restoring the reputation of the people you trampled." The guests around them began to clap, first scattered, then gathering like waves. The applause blended with camera clicks and soft cheers from those long bowed beneath prejudice. Mustering her courage, Sophia stepped out from behind the counter, her voice trembling but clear. "Parker, I am sorry I saw your name in the system from the beginning." Renee turned her eyes gently. "Thank you lated, but still in time." Sophia bowed her head as tears spilled down her cheeks. She understood that a single sentence now could change the course of her life. Bradley stood dazed at the center of the lobby, surrounded by flashes and relentless whispers. "You have ruined me," he rasped for a misunderstanding. Renee looked at him for longer than a breath. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice low, more sorrowful than angry. "Is that what you call humiliation, when people are treated like criminals because they do not look like luxury guests? You call that a misunderstanding?" She stepped closer, her voice soft but carrying through the lobby. "Stone, do you know the difference between power and dignity? Power convinces people they can order others to be silent. Dignity makes them stand and forces you to listen." A roar of applause cracked like thunder. Olivia Chen lifted her phone. Higher, her live stream surged to 800,000 views. In only a few minutes, comments poured like a flood. "This woman is legendary. And she didn't scream, she conquered. And this is what dignity looks like." Renee drew a steady breath and inclined her head slightly. "Thank you all for witnessing this," she said, her voice softer, but still full of strength. "Not to shame anyone, but to remind us. Respect has no exceptions, and dignity is not something that requires permission. The last light of sunset spilled through the glass and crowned her face with a halo like truth finally revealed. Bradley lowered his head, the smug smile of earlier, gone Aurora crest. The fortress of power he once ruled had changed hands, not by blood, not by violence, only by the truth. The Aurora Crest lobby fell into an unfamiliar kind of quiet. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of awakening the employees who once bowed to Bradley Stone, now stood motionless. Their eyes fixed on the woman they had doubted, now radiant beneath the lights, and hundreds of live-streaming phones. Renee Parker remained where she was, at the very center of the lobby, under crystal reflections that glowed around her like a halo. She did not need to shout or gesture. Every breath she took had become a command. Bradley, Kim, and Kevin, the three whose badges had just been disabled, still could not fully grasp what had happened. They clung to the idea that this was a technical glitch, but the red lights on the control panel kept blinking, and every secure door refused them. Tara Renee said, her voice low and precise. "Reconfirm operational access, transfer, full administrative control to me, and begin human protocol." 0. Tara answered at once, her voice rolling through the lobby's speakers so everyone could hear it. "Confirmed human protocol. 0 activated access credential. Renee.Parker.primary. Locking all accounts belonging to Bradley Stone, Kim Hart, and Kevin Doyle." System alert effective. Immediately a chain of beeps followed. Bradley's ID vibrated briefly, then went dark. Lauren, or rather Kim Hart, stared at her badge, blazing red, her eyes wide and lips trembling. Kevin set his badge down on the counter, where it lay still like a piece of incriminating evidence. Breathing quickened throughout the room. Then the first wave of applause rose from the far side, hesitant and small, but within seconds it spread like a breeze. An older woman called out, "Justice arrived," quickly. A young man by the door laughed. "She does not need a courtroom. She is the court." Bradley stood, dazed, his voice rough. "You cannot do this. I have given this hotel 10 years. I have run it since the beginning." Renee turned back to him, the anger gone from her face, replaced by disappointment. "Yes," she said slowly, her voice heavy with regret. "You were here from day one. I remember when you were nominated as general manager, I believed you would make this place a symbol of hospitality. Not prejudice wrapped in a fine suit." Bradley opened his mouth, but the words stuck in his throat. Renee stepped closer, her gaze bright as steel. "You called the police to remove the very person who signed your hiring decision. You humiliated me before international guests and in front of dozens of cameras and called it power. But today, you learn a simple lesson. Power cannot save anyone from consequences when the person you humiliate is the truth." She paused, breathing steady, her eyes sweeping to Kim and Kevin. "And the two of you." Kim lowered her head, tears running her voice, breaking. "I was only following orders," Renee answered softly, but with the chill of a blade. "Orders never erase responsibility. You could have chosen to say no. But you chose silence, and your hand was the one placed on my shoulder." Kim sobbed. "I am sorry." Renee said nothing to that. She only turned to Kevin. "And you, Kevin Doyle, you took my card, raised it like a trophy, and said, 'It belonged to the company.' Let me remind you, I am the company. And you just made the most foolish mistake of your career, stealing from your owner right in front of the world's cameras." Kevin trembled, his lips bloodless, backing away, whispering, "I did not know," Renee replied, cold. Not knowing never absolves guilt. It only deepens cowardice. She lifted her chin and drew a long breath, then turned to face every staff member scattered through the lobby, frightened and confused. Her voice carried not loud, but weighty. What happened today will be preserved forever, not only because the internet will spread it, but because it exposes what I tried to forget. That prejudice still exists in the very house I built on faith in people. She looked around at faces bent downward. But I will not tear down Aurora Crest. I will do something harder. I will rebuild it with real respect. Her words brought more than a few to tears. Sophia, the young receptionist, stepped out of line, choking up Miss. Parker, her voice shook. I knew it from the beginning. I saw your name in the system. But I was afraid. I am sorry. Renee smiled gentler than ever. It is all right, Sophia. What matters is that you chose to stand up, even late. And that is what makes you different from them. She laid a light hand on Sophia's shoulder, a small gesture that made the whole lobby swell with feeling. Tara's voice came over the speakers. Human protocol. 0 complete 3 personnel suspended report. Sent to headquarters. Renee nodded slightly. Thank you, Tara, and send the internal notice. Now a soft ping rang from the employees' phones around the lobby. An internal email had arrived. Its subject line was clear. Urgent notice. Operational authority at Aurora Crest is temporarily transferred directly to Chief Executive Officer Renee Parker. Sophia skimmed it with tear-bright eyes. She really did it right here. Bradley lifted his head, his voice thin. What do you want from me? An apology? Fine, I am sorry. I was wrong there. But doing this in front of everyone, you are destroying your own reputation. Renee looked at him. Not angry. Not scornful. The look of someone who has walked through the storm and knows she does not need to shout to win. No, mister. Stone, she said slowly. I do not need you to apologize to me. I need you to apologize to everyone who has been treated as I was, for their skin, for their clothes, for not looking like the luxury guests you wanted to welcome. She stepped closer, her voice dropping but sharpening. And if you are sincere, remember this justice does not need a stage. It needs only one person patient enough to wait for the right moment. Bradley bowed his head. He had nothing left to say. Olivia Chen lowered her phone, tears on her cheeks, whispering to her camera partner. I have never seen a moment this powerful. She did not just win. She made all of us look inward. The live stream crossed more than 1 million views. Tens of thousands of comments poured in. This is history, and she did not just fire them. She freed the rest, and respect is power. Renee turned to the crowd and smiled, her voice, light yet carrying. Thank you for witnessing this. Not to gloat, but to remember that dignity cannot be taken. A thunder of applause rolled through the marble hall. She stood in that applause as steady as a mountain after thunder. No more words needed, because everything had already been said by action. Bradley Kim and Kevin stood in the glare of dozens of phones, the lights shining on them like mirrors reflecting their faults. Aurora Crest was no longer a fortress of power. It had become a symbol of truth restored, and the woman once humiliated here, with nothing more than a steady voice, had turned a hotel lobby into a courtroom and the entire world into witnesses. The Aurora Crest lobby was no longer a battlefield. It had quieted, as if cleansed by an invisible rain. The only sounds that remained were the fading echoes of applause, the soft sighs of relief, and a few quiet tears rolling down the faces of those who had witnessed everything Renee Parker still stood at the center of the lobby, her eyes lifted toward the glass ceiling, where the last light of sunset poured through, wrapping her in a soft, golden glow. Her face no longer carried anger, only the calm of someone who had fought for what was right and finally found peace across from her. Bradley Stone stood silent, his expression hollow as stone. Kim Hart clutched her bag tightly, tears falling as she kept her head low. Kevin Doyle bowed his hands, clasped together, eyes avoiding every camera lens those who once gave orders and looked down on others, now stood hollow, stripped of power that had vanished like smoke. Miss Parker Sophia. Ramirez whispered, her voice trembling. Renee turned, her eyes softened, yet carried a quiet strength that made anyone she looked at want to stand taller. You don't need to be afraid. Renee said, tomorrow Aurora Crest will still open its doors, but it will no longer be a place that makes people feel small. The words broke something inside Sophia. She nodded rapidly, tears spilling as she choked. I promise, I'll do better. I'll protect what's right. Renee placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a touch so light, yet it felt to Sophia like a ceremony of strength, and in that moment within the lobby that had seen humiliation and arrogance, something new was reborn. Another employee. The young security guard, Jason Miller, stepped forward and removed his cap. Miss Parker, he said softly, I'm sorry for holding your arm. I was only following orders. Renee smiled, a smile free of resentment. You recognized your mistake and stopped. That's enough. What matters isn't that we make mistakes, but that we have the courage to stop when we realize we're wrong. Jason nodded, his eyes glistening, not knowing that with those few words she had restored not only his job but his belief in his work. A soft chime echoed, the elevator doors opened. A group of guests stepped out, pausing in confusion at the sight of cameras and lights. An elderly woman asked quietly, What happened here? Another guest replied, Something that'll be remembered longer than any advertisement this hotel ever made. Olivia Chen was still live-streaming her voice, lower now, steady and sincere. Everyone, there are moments, not just worth watching but worth thinking about. We just witnessed a woman humiliated, but she didn't shout. She didn't retaliate. She simply let truth speak for itself. And that's what made the whole world listen. The comments poured in. This is power without shouting. She turned humiliation into history. Dignity always wins. Renee lifted her phone. Tara's voice came through. Miss Parker, the system is stable. The entire event has been backed up and transmitted to headquarters. The media is already reaching out for confirmation. Renee nodded slightly. Thank you. Tara, issue an official press statement. Say this. No one guest or employee will ever be judged by appearance at Aurora Crest, and add one more line. Respect isn't a policy. It's a promise. Understood, Tara replied. Renee looked around, her eyes sweeping over every face, the witnesses and audience of a moment she knew would travel far beyond those walls. Her voice deepened, clear and resonant. I didn't come here to show authority. I came as a guest because I wanted to know if after all these years the values I built still lived in this place. And today I have my answer. She paused, a quiet sadness in her gaze. But I also saw something else, that there are still good people. Those who choose what's right, even when they feel small. And they are the reason I believe Aurora Crest can still be saved. A wave of applause filled the room again. Not loud or frenzied, but warm and sincere. The sound of gratitude. Bradley lifted his head. His voice cracked. Miss Parker, if I could please, Give me a chance to make this right." Renee looked at him for a long moment. In her eyes there was anger, compassion, and exhaustion all at once. "Mr. Stone," she said, "opportunity doesn't disappear. It simply changes hands. And to earn it back, you'll have to start with something you've never done before. Learn how to listen." He nodded, tears running down his cheeks, unable to speak. Renee turned and began to walk her steps, slow, the sound of her heels echoing like the heartbeat of the building itself. The guests instinctively moved aside, forming an open path toward the elevator. No one told them to. They just felt they should. The soft golden light reflected off her white blouse, making her seem like a symbol, not of power but of dignity. Standing firm amid the storm just before stepping into the elevator, she turned toward the crowd, her voice low yet clear, flowing through the air like water. "Today I didn't defeat anyone. I simply reminded everyone and myself that silence isn't weakness. It's strength, when used to make others reflect." There was a pause. Then someone whispered, "Thank you." Another voice followed. "You made us believe kindness still matters then." Applause rose again, this time not as celebration, but as recognition. Renee smiled. "Thank you all. Thank you for witnessing this. Not for me, but for anyone who has ever been told they don't belong." She stepped into the elevator. The polished steel doors reflected her calm, steady figure. No longer the woman denied check-in, but the symbol of simple, unshakable justice. As the doors closed, she spoke softly, just loud enough for Olivia's microphone to catch. Dignity doesn't need justification. It only needs to be preserved, even when the world tries to take it away. The elevator sealed shut. The Aurora Crest lobby erupted in applause, cheers and the flashes of cameras. Olivia lowered her phone, tears in her voice, as she said to the camera, "That's what I'll tell my children, that one day in Chicago, a woman reminded the world that respect is not earned by money, but by character." The live stream ended with a final image. Young employees embracing Sophia, wiping her tears, and a caption on screen that read, "Aurora Crest, where justice was restored, not by power, but by perseverance." Renee Parker stepped out on the top floor balcony, looking over Lake Michigan, glimmering in the late afternoon light. The wind brushed through her hair, carrying the echoes from below. Applause, cheers, and somewhere the quiet sobs of remorse. She closed her eyes, thinking to herself, "I didn't have to shout, yet they heard me. I didn't have to prove anything, because truth proved itself." And in that moment, beneath the Chicago sunset, Renee Parker smiled the smile of someone who had turned pain into lesson and lesson into legacy. 36 hours after the Aurora Crest incident, the sky over Chicago was covered in the soft gray of a late morning, but the world was no longer quiet, because overnight, a 19-minute video capturing the moment Renee Parker was humiliated, and her stunning reversal had spread across every platform on TikTok. The short clip where she said, "Every word you say is already," history reached 42 million views on YouTube. The full version, titled Black CEO, denied a room at her own hotel, then fired the whole staff. Live surpassed 15 million views in just 12 hours. CNN, BBC, Forbes, and hundreds of international outlets ran the story. The headline flashing across Times Square that morning read, "Renee Parker, when silence speaks in Chicago." Aurora Crest, once a symbol of luxury, had become a modern pilgrimage site for justice people who had watched the video, visited the lobby just to stand in the same spot where she had spoken those words on the marble floor. The staff had polished every surface, but someone had quietly carved a small inscription near the staircase that read, "Be careful, every word you say is already history." Renee sat in her top-floor office overlooking Lake Michigan, the glass doors slightly open, letting in the sound of gentle waves against the shore. On her desk lay dozens of faxes, emails, and handwritten letters from around the world. One was from a black mother in Atlanta, Ms. Parker. "I was once kicked out of a restaurant because they assumed I couldn't afford the meal. I stayed silent because I was afraid. But when I saw you stand there with your head held high, I cried. Not because you took revenge, but because you stood tall. Thank you for showing my daughter that silence can have power." Renee read each line slowly, her hand trembling slightly outside her door. Sophia Ramirez knocked softly mid. "Parker, a journalist from The Guardian, is requesting a live interview. Would you like to take it?" Renee smiled. "Let them wait. My staff comes first at 10 in the morning. All Aurora Crest employees gathered in the lobby. No cameras, no audience, just them. The ones who had to live with the legacy of that lesson." Renee walked out, dressed simply in a white blouse and grey trousers. No blazer, no CEO badge. "We've all witnessed the most painful truth a company can reveal." She began, not a failure in service, but a failure in humanity. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the bowed heads. "But if I only fired a few people and walked away, I'd be no better. Aurora Crest doesn't need revenge. It needs change." She turned, gesturing to the plaque behind her, where the words, "Hospitality with Heart," had hung since the opening day. "We forgot where the heart was in hospitality. From this day on, I want everyone to understand. Hospitality isn't reserved for those who look like VIPs. It's for human beings." Applause echoed through the hall. A few people teared up. Jason Miller. The security guard bowed deeply. Renee nodded and continued. "I'm creating the Aurora Respect Initiative each year. This hotel will fund scholarships for students in hospitality, especially those who have faced discrimination. And Sophia, you will oversee the program." Sophia gasped, tears spilling, as she nodded repeatedly. Meanwhile, in New York, good morning. America replayed the scene of Renee leaving the elevator with the caption. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. The host said, "What moved the world wasn't the firing, but how she turned humiliation into a global lesson in humanity." On Twitter, hashtags Renee Parker, Aurora Crest and Dignity Wins trended across 37 countries. Major CEOs posted public comments, a wake-up call for the entire service industry. Renee Parker just did what others only discuss at conferences. This isn't just about discrimination, it's leadership through character in his small suburban apartment. Bradley Stone watched the video. For the 10th time, he saw himself, the flushed face, the harsh tone, the arrogance in his eyes, and opposite him, the woman who stood silent and still letting the world speak for her. He closed his laptop and lowered his head, shoulders trembling for the first time in years. Bradley felt true shame that afternoon. As Renee left her office, dozens of reporters waited outside. One asked, "Ms. Parker, do you think your actions will make managers afraid to lead?" Renee stopped and smiled softly. "No," she said. "I hope they'll be afraid to look down on people." Camera flashes erupted, but they couldn't dim the gentle sunlight that framed her, like someone who had turned the place of her humiliation into a symbol of fairness. That night, Renee returned to her small apartment, the one she had kept long before she became a billionaire. No bodyguards, no driver, only silence. She opened her laptop and saw the CNN interview titled, The woman who redefined power. The host asked, "Do you think you've won?" Renee looked into the camera and smiled. "No one wins when someone else is degraded. I simply stood firm and let justice find its way." That night, the Chicago sky reflected the bright lights of Times Square, where the giant screen displayed a simple white message on a black background. Renee Parker. Dignity isn't given, it's chosen. The quote became one of the most shared lines on LinkedIn and was soon framed in conference rooms around the world the next morning. Aurora Crest reopened its doors to dozens of new guests. None came to witness a scandal. They came to see change. An elderly man smiled as Sophia greeted him warmly. "Welcome to Aurora Crest, where everyone belongs." From the upper floor, Renee watched quietly, feeling at peace. She knew that true justice wasn't in firing 3 people, but in teaching hundreds how to begin again with heart. She whispered to herself, her voice calm and sincere. "I never wanted them to fear me. I only wanted them to remember when we treat others as less. We're the ones who become smaller." The wind from Lake Michigan swept through. Again, the glass reflected her image, no longer the silhouette of a powerful CEO, but of a woman who made the world believe that dignity can become humanity's common language. 2 weeks after the Aurora Crest incident, the world still hadn't stopped talking about the name Renee Parker. Across social media, millions of users were sharing the video under the hashtag #DignityRevolution, a new movement born from a single moment, the moment when one woman chose silence over anger and let truth speak for itself. Newspapers called it the Aurora Effect. Prestigious universities from Harvard to Stanford opened seminars titled Leadership and Moral Authority, the Parker Case. Major hospitality corporations revised their employee conduct codes. A Marriott executive wrote in an internal memo, "We once taught our staff how to serve guests, but now we must teach them how to respect people." In Chicago, Aurora Crest transformed so visibly that people could feel it the moment they entered the lobby. The walls now displayed artwork by local artists, and the staff greeted guests with genuine smiles instead of the rehearsed kind. At the grand staircase, a small bronze plaque was placed with Renee's words engraved on it. "Silence is not weakness. It is the strength of those who know when justice should speak." Guests stopped to read it, many with tears in their eyes. That single quote had become the soul of the building. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the Committee on Diversity and Business Ethics sent Renee an invitation to speak at the Global Forum on Corporate Culture in 2025. The moderator's letter read, "We want to hear not only your story, but the philosophy of leadership that made the world stop and listen." Renee read the letter late one evening, sitting in her office, the soft light reflecting off her tired but resolute face. Tara, her assistant, set a cup of ginger tea beside her. "Will you attend?" she asked. Renee smiled faintly. "I'm not sure. I never thought I'd become a symbol." Tara smiled back. "Maybe the world needs a symbol who knows when to be silent." Renee looked out the window at the city lights glittering below. She remembered Bradley Stone's look of disdain, the thunderous applause in the lobby, and the tearful eyes that met her words. Dignity cannot be negotiated. Now all of it had become the foundation for change. One morning, an email arrived from the United Nations. The subject line read, "Invitation UN Summit on Human Dignity and Inclusion." The Secretary General wrote, "Your story has transcended a corporate incident. It reminds the world that equality is not a slogan, but a daily act." Renee sighed softly. She wasn't a politician or an activist. She was simply a woman who was once told, "You don't belong here." And now the world was coming to her with the same question. How do we change? In Chicago, local reporters interviewed witnesses who had been in the lobby that day. A middle-aged woman said I was just a tourist, but when I saw how she stood still, I felt ashamed because I too had stayed silent in the face of injustice. Since then, I've learned to speak up, not with anger, but with truth. A college student replayed the video dozens of times for his thesis on the power of silence. TikTok was flooded with recreations of Renee's line, "Be careful. Every word you say is already history set to music and translated into hundreds of languages." 3 months later, at the Global Forum in Washington, the auditorium was packed. Renee walked onto the stage without reading her prepared speech. She told her story in her natural, grounded voice. I once believed success meant building an empire. But now I understand. True success is when that empire learns to bow before human worth. She paused, scanning the thousands of faces before her: business leaders, politicians, and students. People say I stood up, but I didn't. I just stood still. Because sometimes when you don't run, don't shout, and don't fight back, you make the world stop long enough to look at itself. The entire hall rose in applause, not just in admiration, but in genuine agreement. At the same time, Bradley Stone appeared for the first time since his dismissal on a local television program. His voice was low and remorseful. I used to think I understood hospitality, but what I really understood was power. I didn't realize that in the lobby, I managed there were souls I made feel invisible. Miss Parker made me see that. And the first thing I did after watching that video was call the people I had disrespected and apologize. The interviewer was stunned not because he felt regret, but because for once, justice had changed the heart of the one who had caused the harm. A year later, the Aurora Crest Initiative had expanded into an international fund with support from the United Nations. Hotels around the world joined the Respect First program, a training course inspired by Parker's philosophy. In every session, the trainers began with the same line. Remember, guests don't come from social classes. They come from humanity. Back in Chicago on a spring afternoon, Renee strolled through the lobby of her own hotel. There were no cameras, no crowds, only the scent of orchids and the sound of a piano. She stopped at the very spot where a year before a guard had held her arm. Now a small plaque stood there. Her dignity reclaimed its voice. April 2025. A young Asian couple walked up and read it. The wife whispered, "I've watched this video so many times. It's hard to believe it happened right here." Renee turned to them with a gentle smile. And it's still happening every day in how we treat one another. As night fell, Renee stood by the window of the top floor, gazing at the city lights shimmering across the lake. Tara entered, holding an international news bulletin. The United Nations has officially recognized the Aurora Code of Respect, the world's first human dignity standard in hospitality, inspired by you. Renee stayed silent for a moment, then said softly, "Maybe the world doesn't need more rules. It just needs more hearts willing to see each other as human." She turned toward the window, her eyes following the tiny figures moving below, and thought, "A year ago, they said, I didn't belong here. Now I don't just belong. I've left part of my soul here in every glance that carries respect." And so, from what began as a small confrontation between a hotel and a guest, Renee Parker had unknowingly sparked a quiet revolution. There were no slogans, no protests, only one simple truth: when dignity stands firm, the world has no choice but to change. A year later, the world still spoke of Renee Parker as a symbol of a new era, an era where strength was no longer measured by how loud one could shout, but by the calmness of standing still in the storm. From the lobby of a hotel in Chicago, her message had traveled farther than any marketing campaign, farther than any speech about equality. It had reached schools, workplaces, hospitals, and places with no cameras at all, where people began asking themselves, "Am I treating others the way they deserve to be treated?" Renee never sought fame. She declined most interviews, saying only one sentence when asked about her legacy. "I don't want people to remember me for firing 3 people. I want them to remember that I didn't lose myself even when I was insulted in my own house." Those simple yet piercing words were engraved onto the glass wall of Aurora Crest as a reminder for every generation of employees to come. One afternoon, Renee returned to the lobby where sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, landing precisely on the bronze inscription embedded in the floor. "Be careful. Every word you say is already history." Guests still stopped to read it. Some smiled, some shed quiet tears. She stood silently watching and realized that sometimes revolutions don't need blood or noise. They begin with a single moment when a human being chooses to hold on to their dignity, even when pushed to the edge. Renee looked up, seeing her reflection in the towering glass, not the image of a CEO, but of the woman who made the world relearn the meaning of respect. The wind from Lake Michigan drifted in again, soft as a whisper. She smiled faintly, her eyes glowing with the kind of peace only those who have weathered storms could know. Justice, she thought, has never needed to be loud. It only needs a heart willing to stand still and never bow. Aurora Crest continued to open its doors, welcoming guests from all over the world, but everyone who stepped through them knew they were entering not just a hotel, but a living symbol of human dignity. And on the highest floor, as the evening light spread across the lake, Renee Parker still stood there, quiet, strong, and steadfast, embodying the message she had left to the world live, in such a way that when you are looked down upon, your silence alone makes the entire system listen. Many years later, when people spoke of the Aurora Crest incident, they no longer talked about the shocking firings or the record-breaking number of views. They spoke about how one woman had turned humiliation into a light that guided an entire generation. Renee Parker passed away at the age of 61 in her small home overlooking Lake Michigan, the very place where the sunset once reflected across her face on that fateful day. The world fell silent when the news was announced. Within hours, millions of posts appeared, all carrying the same caption, "Dignity never dies." Her funeral did not take place in a cathedral, but in the lobby of Aurora Crest, the place where it had all begun. The employees who once worked with her stood in a long line, wearing new uniforms with a small line of text embroidered over the heart. "Respect is our uniform." Sophia Ramirez, now the head of human resources, spoke with a trembling voice. Ms. Parker taught us that justice doesn't need a gavel, it only needs people brave enough to stand tall. On the wall of the lobby, a large screen played the moment from years ago, when she said, "I don't need to shout to be heard. I only need the truth to stand with me." The applause from that crowd seemed to echo once more, blending with the quiet sobs of those gathered there today. Not only in Chicago, but in Paris, Tokyo, Johannesburg, and dozens of cities around the world, the hotels under Parker Hospitality lowered their flags to half-mast. Employees everywhere read aloud the Declaration of Dignity, a document Renee had written before retiring work as if every glance from you could make someone believe in humanity. If you cannot make others rich, make them feel respected. The press called that day the Day of Noble Silence. Millions of people turned off their televisions, holding a moment of silence online to honor the woman who had changed the world without ever needing a slogan. At Lake Michigan, the wind blew softly, the golden sunset spread across the water, forming a glowing path that seemed to stretch into infinity. A little girl holding her mother's hand by the railing asked quietly, "Mom, is that where she used to stand?" The mother nodded, eyes glistening with tears. "Yes, sweetheart." And from that day on, wherever there is light, she is there too. At the top of the Aurora Crest Tower, a new bronze plaque had been added, engraved with the final words she left behind before her passing. "If my silence once made the world listen, let your kindness make the world keep speaking." And so, even though Renee Parker was gone, the light she kindled in the heart of humanity continued to shine warm, enduring, and eternal. From the perspective of an expert in ethical leadership and corporate culture, the journey of Renee Parker is not merely a story about justice, but a testament to the evolution of modern leadership, where true power no longer lies in the loudest voice, but in the one who dares to remain silent, so that truth can speak for itself. She didn't need to defeat anyone, because the way she stood firm made the entire world stop and reflect. In an era where arrogance often disguises itself as authority, Renee reminds us that dignity never goes out of style. It is the only foundation that makes a person truly strong. If you believe that respect remains the light guiding every path to success. Like to share this message? Subscribe to follow stories where justice is told through compassion, and comment the phrase that represents your belief. Hold your dignity.